Hey there, and welcome to another episode of the REDink Writers podcast. My name is Sandy Butchers. I am the author and illustrator of the Singularian Grimoire anthologies on Kickstarter, and you can find me on sandybutchers.com.
And I'm Lydia Stevens, author of the Ginger Davenport Escapades and the Hellfire series. And today we're going to talk about growth and development through editing. And we've got a very special guest star on our episode today, Daniel Rafe. He's a longtime client of creative content critiquing and consulting. And we are so pleased to have Daniel on the show today, as I've been working with him for over 2 years now. So welcome to the show.
Hi, everyone. How are you?
I think everyone is doing great. I'm just going to fill that in for them. I've decided everyone is feeling great today.
Yeah.
All right. This is the first time we've met, and we just had a little chat of an amazing life full of art and acting and writing. Could you just give us a quick recap on that? Because I thought it was really interesting.
Yeah. So I guess it really starts back when I was like 9 years old. I had moved around a lot when I was a kid, and didn't have a lot of friends, and so I escaped into comic books and was really into comic book art, and that eventually led into me wanting to be a painter. Went into art school in college and a little bit after college. Kind of found out I really didn't have the talent for it, and that led into acting. Ended up being an actor in San Francisco. Then that led me into going into an overseas program at the Bristol Old Vic in England. Tried my hand at professional acting for a while, and that transitioned into screenwriting, which eventually led me into novel writing.
Wow.
And that's kind of where we are now. But I think what we were saying is that the common theme was storytelling through all of that for me. Yeah. And telling stories, whether it's through pictures or whether it's acting myself or through language, is something I've always enjoyed.
Wow.
Great. So can you kind of elaborate on that a little bit? Can you tell us a little bit more about your writing journey, and then sort of how that led you to working with an editor, with me?
Yeah, so I think when I decided to go from screenwriting to writing, there was a couple of different forces that happened. Primarily, I got married. That was one major factor. And I needed to settle down and get a regular job to be able to provide for my family. And screenwriting in itself, I thought would have been a hard, as much hard as writing is, I thought screenwriting would have been also very difficult. Plus there's a certain lifestyle that wasn't going to work out for me. So I went into writing and was able to use a lot of my acting skills, script analysis. I understood already the journey of a script or a story. I already understood acts. I understood scenes to some degree. But translating those skills into novel writing was a very different experience. When I first started writing, 11 years ago, I tried to do that, and then I worked on it for a year or two. I went into a PhD program, which unfortunately I did 3 years of it, and I was not able to finish it for financial reasons. And when I left that, I wanted to get back into it, and I got to the point where I was just really frustrated. And I had taken what I could do myself through I must own, probably like a lot of, other writers out there, I probably own 250 writing books. Like every single writing book that you can possibly own, I have. And you're trying to educate yourself, you're trying to do it. And there comes a point where I wasn't getting any better. I could understand structure better. I could develop scenes to a certain level, but my novels weren't working. And I couldn't figure out why. And I think that I got to the point where it's like, okay, I can't go to an MFA program. Like, I was too old for that. I had too many, obligations. By the time I left the PhD program, I already had 2 children. Now I have 3. I have 2 jobs. I'm writing, and there was just no way that I could afford an MFA. There was no time for it. And so it was like, what do I do? And I went on to a Facebook group, and I'm like, hey, does anyone know any kind of developmental editor? And there's different types of developmental editors and whatever. And I'm telling you, it was like a stroke of luck. And someone recommended 3 or 4 people. And Lydia, I don't even know if I've ever told you this. And someone recommended Lydia.
Oh my God.
I went to the editors, and I went to see if they had published any books.
Mm-hmm.
Lydia had. I read one of her, your first book, one of the Ginger books from Amazon. I was looking at the preview, and I read that, and I'm like, I can't write this good. And that's simple. And then I'm like, hey, what do you do? And so that was how I contacted Lydia, and I'm telling you, it's been the best thing for me. And there came a point that Lydia was like my editor, and then I told her about 6 months later, no, you're going to be my coach. You're my MFA program now. And so that's kind of where we are.
Yeah, it definitely developed. I love that it did develop into something more organic, in which, you'd be working on one project and we'd be editing that, and then you'd come back to me and you'd say, well, I just, I set that aside, but I've got this idea. What do you think? So then it sort of snowballed from there. And I think, Sandy, that's sort of how, that's a similar experience that you and I had, in that, we met online, and yeah.
Yeah, I don't know if you saw that. I was grabbing myself a piece of paper to make notes on, because the one word that I still remember from what you just said, Daniel, was the frustration of not, coming any further, of being stuck and needing someone entirely blank from your work to look at it and say, this is what's going wrong. And that is exactly how I stumbled onto Lydia as well. And it was also through Facebook, and I was scared to death to ask her, what are your prices? Because I know this stuff is expensive, and she was doing an amazing job for an amazing price, and I was like, yes, Lydia, you're hired. And then that, and the same thing, we rolled into working from one project, and it turned huge, and then we have also been, it's been 1.5 years now.
Yeah, something like that. I think, pretty much around the same time for both of you. And the two of you have stuck with me.
Yeah. But it says something, because you are an amazing editor, and I don't think I ever could have written the stuff that I've written without your eyes and without your burning comments saying just delete it.
The blush. Well, you've also gotten to the point now, Sandy, where you call it Dutch directness, but we've also become very good friends in that we do this podcast together and stuff like that. And my editing approach is very much, for every critique that I have, I also find something positive about the writing, because I think it's really important to reinforce that, because when people know what they're doing right, they can then emulate that in other areas of the writing, and similarly, when they know that there's something that needs to be improved on, then they can go back and fix that. But I think when you point out something that somebody's doing well, that's sort of a booster in that you can do this, and that you do have areas which really work. So with you, I've just kind of gotten to the point where I'm like, what are you doing? What are you doing? You know what you do well. What are you doing?
I love those comments where you just go, le sigh. And I'm like, okay, I know, this is shit. All right. Daniel, does she have any of those kind of comments for you too, or?
A couple, yeah, a couple.
Yeah, once in a while. But she's, I don't know. She's very direct with me, and a lot of her comments are really the same, because I just can't, it takes me a while to learn them. So it's a lot of just keep doing it. But it's a lot of just, you don't have it yet, you're almost there, keep going, keep layering it.
Yeah, I think that sort of leads into the next question that I have. And how would you say your writing has improved, and how have you grown and developed as a writer because of working with me or working with an editor? And I think you sort of started to answer that a little bit, in that a lot of the comments are the same, but at the same time, I have noticed in the last 2 years a remarkable improvement, and the comments have shifted. Not that they've shifted to start going deeper into those layers, in the sense that they're not sort of those surface of, you need to fix this because this is glaringly obvious, but hey, what if you tried this as well? So I'd like you to touch on that a little bit, because I've noticed a huge improvement. So
I think when I first was working with you, one of my issues went from, particularly as an actor and even as someone who wanted to be an artist, everything was very visual for me. So I would see the picture and I would be describing it almost like a director, right? And even though I know that the shift, the main difference between novel writing and screenwriting or acting or film or whatever is that you're able to go inside the character, right? The internal piece. That was very difficult for me. And so one of the things that we had worked on was trying to go into that, but then there was that further step, right? Which is not just what is that character thinking, but developing the reactions of that character. And then that third step of going deeper into those reactions. And so for sure, they're not the same comment of what it was 2 years ago, though it's still in the same realm of this is where we need to go and still deepening that work.
So I can tell you exactly what I'm leading you into, and maybe this will help click a little bit. So you said it yourself, screenwriting is very different in that you look at it as a director looking at the picture. So what I've been guiding you into is not being the director, being the actor. You put yourself in the character's position, and how would you think, feel, react, to any of these situations that this character is in, and you're slowly starting to do that. And I notice it more and more and more. And so then, yes, you've got the reaction on the page, like he punched a guy, and he was angry about it. Okay, how do we then go even deeper than that? He punched a guy and he was angry because the guy went after his girlfriend or something like that. So, it's adding those layers and slowly getting you to work around from outside looking in to inside looking out. So, yeah.
Lydia, do you remember with one of my first manuscripts where all my characters were being punched in the face all the time and they just didn't respond? They were just doing nothing. They were like, oh, all right. And you were just laughing.
I did it with Sandy too, Daniel. I did. They would be punched and then they would just start talking about the weather, and I'm like, if I were punched in the face, I would have something to say about it. So yes, I think that's definitely sort of that when you get somebody from the outside, and I have Sandy doing a lot of my editing now as well, and you have somebody take a look at that piece who's not in your head, who's not in that character's head, and they can spot these areas that need to be worked on and need to be fleshed out a bit, because they would sit in, because what they're doing as a reader, you're sitting there and you're saying, if I were this character, I would, and does the reaction make sense? If it doesn't, then you need to revise something. If it does, then you're like, okay, and you keep going, and then you look at things like setting and pace and tone and things like that. And so you always want to start with your character development, and then you develop everything, the world around that character. So that just to give you both a little hint to my to why I say the things I do. Like, if I get slapped in the face, I've got something to say about it. So it needs to be on the page. So so what do you think the biggest takeaway is in terms of your writing or your writing career, or where you want to go as a writer, working with an editor?
Yeah, and so I think that, I think there's a couple of takeaways for me, which is one, a developmental editor, if you have the right one, is not someone you hire for a book. It's someone that you hire to develop your skills probably to a certain level. I'm sure there are certain authors who wouldn't need to continue developing certain skill sets if they have a lot of experience or they're a published author for many years. Then they might need that the editor to go in and just look at a book. But for someone who wants to be published or who's newly published or it's been a few years, to have someone who's the coach versus to look at the editor more as that coach, as a training, as someone who's going to be able to level up your craft, I think is a major takeaway. Coming from my current job is as an elementary principal, and I was a teacher before that, you know, we don't go through the grades without instruction. We don't go through college without instruction. You don't go into a master's or PhD program without instruction. So like, it's a weird thing that we think that you can become a novelist or some sort of artist without any instruction, that you can just figure it out yourself. So the biggest takeaway for me is staying on that track, which is not to lose sight the importance of a coach who can take you up on your craft. I think that's my number one thing. I think the second thing is being able to be open-minded to where your coach wants to take you. Sometimes, and I'm certainly guilty of this as a person, is that we have a vision of where we want to go, but the outside person actually has a better sense of where we need to go. And trusting that process, that eventually the two will meld together and create actually a third version. And I think trusting that process is a really important piece. And that's why I think having that relationship, a long-term relationship with the writing coach is so important. Like, this goes back to, I'm just going to give you a lot of credit here, Lydia, because I hadn't had this before. And I actually have said this to you on the phone, like, I have never had someone who just like, hey, give me a call, let me talk to you.
Yeah.
Like, that's not, like, there were many times you're like, call me, we'll talk about it. And I'm like, what are you talking about? Because that's normally like a $300 phone call, right? And I didn't have that. Like, that's a relationship build. And to have that relationship with someone who you can trust, who you know's got your best self-interest, and you know, it's just so critical. So that's my takeaways for a coach.
Oh, thank you. I do stand by what I tell any client, in that my job here is not to change your story. It's to make you a better writer. And having been with a bad editor before myself, I paid this person well over $1,000 to edit my first manuscript, and they completely took out every aspect of the writing that was the story I was telling. So she came right out and said to me, I don't edit fantasy, and my book was fantasy. So that should have been a red flag, but having been such a new, you know, I was like, I want to do this. I want it professionally edited. This person can help me. And it just, I think she edited the first 6 pages, and then she got so frustrated with me and with the style of writing and stuff like that, that I never heard from her again. So yeah, that's a really hard, expensive lesson to learn. So I think it's, yeah, so becoming an editor and keeping that experience in mind has always been sort of how I approach my working relationship with a client, in that it's not about what I want on the page. It's or what I want from your writing career. What I want for your writing career and your writing journey is for you to succeed and to kind of come to this vision that you have of where you want to go. And then I'm going to help you get there. You know, because everybody's path and journey in terms of writing is going to be completely different from somebody else's. So, you know, it's learning somebody and what it is that they want from this and helping them get there. So that's kind of how I approach, you know, and in terms of, just to briefly touch on it, prices and stuff like that, I'm not a rich person. I know that, you know, dropping $1,000 on one book, that's a lot of money, and that not, you know, we're artists and creators, and we're poor people. For some reason, society's not figured out that we should be paid for what we do. But you know, I completely understand when a client, you know, wants to do sort of a monthly thing, or, you know, if they can do installments or something like that, because I've been there and I know how hard it is. So, as you know, that piece has never been important to me, and it's not something that, you know, I focus a lot on. I think what's important to me is being able to say to somebody, hey, give me a call, you know, because there's a certain element that when you're talking with somebody face to face or over the phone or something like that, you can truly understand what it is that they're trying to get across on the page, because obviously what's on the page is not what they're trying to put out. So you might not fully grasp what it is they're getting. So when I need a little clarification on a project, I'll say, give me a call. and we'll talk about it. And then I can usually pinpoint whatever it is that you're trying to do and say, okay, you need to do this. And then, you know, and then go from there with the actual document, with the story itself. And then usually I'm hoping that after those conversations that something clicks and it's, you know.
And I think your pinpointing skills are spot on, because I mean, you get more credits again. The way you wear two different hats, one where you read a story and you just like the story, you're just reading it as a reader, completely in love with a certain genre. And then the next moment you take off that hat, you put on your editor's hat and you go, but this doesn't work. And you look at it completely objectively. And that is something that has amazed me in so many different instances where for example, at the end of Bonds of Blood and Silver, you were like, this story is amazing, while we still knew there was a lot of work going on there. I mean, that as an editor is a skill, and I think that is also a part that we as writers sometimes completely miss. We are so connected to our stories and we are so involved with everything going on. In our mind, everything makes perfect sense. Mm-hmm. But our minds often don't make sense.
It doesn't come out on the page.
Yeah, exactly. And that's why, you know, in my opinion, having an editor is almost necessary. I mean, Daniel also said it. It is part of becoming a writer, is having someone to teach you how to actually write.
Yeah. I think, you know, one of the things that I really, really stress is my comments and critiques are never personal against you. I did do a beta reader. I had a bad experience with that too when I first started writing. And I put my first manuscript, and it is awful. It's in the bottom of the filing cabinet, never will see the light of day again. And I put it out there, and you know, and that takes a lot of courage to be able to approach somebody that you don't know and say, hey, can you take a look at this? And I think the difference between what I received from that beta reader and what I try to put out is, I got a lot of, why are you writing? This is so bad, you shouldn't be a writer. You know, what business do you have of, you know, doing this? They're very personal comments, and they're really discouraging. So coming into an editing position and an editing role, I really take to heart of, none of my critiques are ever personal about my client or about you. They're always about the story and how the story could be better. So just because you have something that's not working in a story, that doesn't reflect on you at all as a person. So I think that's one of the biggest things as an editor to really focus on when coming to somebody's work, because it is so personal. You know, we really put everything we have into these stories, and then to have somebody say, you know,
it doesn't work,
garbage or something, it's like, oh,
yeah.
You know, I've been there, I've felt that, and it really, really hurts. So I think my style is to approach it of, you know, this is good, how can we make it better? You know, or this doesn't quite work, but what if we did this instead? So that's, you know, kind of my approach to it. But you know, with you guys have been singing my praises this entire time, but I do have to ask, you know, this is a learning experience for everyone, even me as an editor. So what would you do differently? How would you have the editing relationship be different if it, you know, if it could be, or how would I best serve you or improve as an editor if I could?
So I think on my end, I don't think that the criticism is towards you. I think what's important working with a coach is to be clear on my needs. So, and I think I eventually did this a year and a half into working with you. I think I finally figured out what I needed, which is I needed a mentor text. So I'm someone who works really, really well when I see other people who do it, and then I can literally copy it in a practice, not in my own writing, but as a practice session. And then I can practice that skill set, and then I can go apply that, what I've learned, into my own writing. So it wasn't until I think I went to you and I'm like, hey, listen, you had talked about these reactions, and I was doing it, like I was doing like all like internal body reactions, which is not what you were talking about. And I'm like, I don't get it. Like, can you give me examples? And then I think you gave me, yeah. And then you gave me like 2 or 3, and then they were like science fiction ones. And then I called you back or I think I sent you a text message or something like 2 or 3 weeks later. I'm like, no, who do you like? And then you told me about what's her name? The blood fever.
Kara Murray Monning. Yes.
Right. So I bought all her books, right?
Oh my
and
gosh.
I started right. I started reading her, and I'm like, oh, this is what she's talking about. And then when I went through this period of my time during COVID, which was like extremely stressful, and I could not really write, I was doing practice runs, and I would use some of her writing, and I would use that as a model for like practice sessions, and then I would send it to you, and you're like, whoa, this is so much better. Yeah. And then I would try to apply that to my own story at that point. And so that I needed to communicate better to you, and I think it's really important going forward. If I don't fully understand what you're talking about, or even if I think I do, I need to see other writers who do it, and I need the writers that you know do what you're talking about, even if it's not in my genre. In fact, I prefer not to see it in my genre, because then it makes it translate.
I'm gonna start keeping a running list.
and by the way, that is a way of teaching in schools. It's called a mentor text. And so using mentor text for me is a really, really useful thing.
Oh, I like that. Yes, definitely. All writers should be readers for sure. But I had never heard that expression before, mentor text. I really like that.
But it's not just reading. I do think it's actually reading with the intention of whatever skill set you're asking me to learn. And then the other problem is that I like a lot of writing that's very visual, that doesn't have a lot of reactions. That's the other issue, right? Is that I gravitate to that type of style. So I wouldn't actually have gone to those writers. I needed you to say, this is the type of writer that you now need to model. And I needed to say that to you. So I think it's on the coachee, the person who's being coached, to express how they want to learn to the coach.
Okay.
Because you can't figure that out. That's something for me to express to you.
Well, I learned something new today. A little bit looking for text. Yeah, definitely going to keep that in mind.
It's a really valid point. Yeah, I'm really happy you shared this with us, because I never thought about being an editor actually this way. Like, if you'd be an editor, I think the thought you have is, okay, I need to work on this book, or I need to do my job in general. I never considered that it is our job to make sure the editor can do his job, and this blows my mind.
Sandy's like, the only thing I would change is that Friday night text message when you've had 2 glasses of wine and.
Yeah, don't ever read my books again while you're having, wine.
Mommy juice on a Friday night.
Yes.
Oh, well, that is definitely very good to know. So what advice would you give to somebody who's looking for an editor?
So I think I think to summarize some of the things we've already said, which is understand that where you are in your process, and to ask yourself, are you hiring someone for one book, or are you really hiring a coach to level you up over a longer period of time, and to be able to invest into that process? I think it's be able to express to that coach exactly how do you learn, what do you need. I think that would have been smarter of me to have done that. And I think it would have been, I think part of what would have also be is with the coaches, making sure financially you know what you can actually afford. Before I had ever met Lydia, I had worked with another editor who was also very good, but it cost me a lot of money. And I'm like, okay, I can only do like 6 of them. And for the 6 that I did, it was great, but I really needed more. And so I spent a lot of money, and I got a lot out of it. He was very, very good, but I couldn't sustain financially that work that I really, really needed to develop it. So understanding what your financial situation is and being able to budget that for the long term is also, I think, really critical. Those would be my main things. I guess the other part is be honest with yourself. Like and I think it's important to play both sides. Like, what are your real strengths? What are you good at? So you can't just constantly be beating yourself up. But at the same time, are you really at a professional level? And it's funny because we go into the self-publishing world and people are making a lot of money and we think we're competing with traditional publishing, which in many ways we are. But the best way to sell as a self-publisher is to be a great writer. If people don't like your product, they're not coming back for you. And so one of the things I tell Lydia is that even if I'm not going to publish as a traditional publisher, I want to be at the level of a traditional publisher. I need to have that craft down. And I think there's a piece of honesty that people need to have of like, where are you in your publishing level? And unfortunately, I'm sure we all have read self-publishers who are not. They may actually have good structure. Maybe they know hero's journey or whatever, a story structure they want, but they're not particularly great craftsmen or craftwomen at when they're right. And I think it's really important to want to aspire to a certain craft level.
Yeah, that's a really good point, that honesty with oneself. And even as an editor, and being self-published, I have moments where I'm like, I could have done this better. I should have done this better. And I think that we, as a writer, we're always going to feel that after every book. There's going to be some element where we're kind of kicking ourselves for it. But, working on several projects now and going back and reading some of them, it's that, the ability to self-edit as well. And I'm thinking, this is not up to par. This is, I need, there's something here that needs to change. So that's a very good point. What do you think are the signs of a good editor?
So I think one of them is make sure that no one actually attacks you personally. Like, to hear what you said is kind of shocking on that beta read. I think to have someone who's non-emotional is really, really important in one aspect. They're going to give you blunt advice. If you're not ready for blunt advice, don't get a coach. But at the same time, you need someone who's not trying to tear you down. So there's a difference between this isn't working, which is blunt, versus this is terrible, right? Those are two very different types of ways of expressing yourself.
Lydia, you know what I'm thinking.
Yeah, I do. Sorry, Daniel.
Sorry.
Go ahead.
I think the other part, which I always have appreciated, and again, it's funny because we're singing your praises, and this podcast is about writing coaches, but we end up singing your praises because there's a reason. I don't want to speak for Sandy at all, but for myself, is like, we are with you for a reason, which is you have offered this other piece, which is staying positive. Like, you've got to find someone who's going to see whatever it is that you do good, and that they can acknowledge that piece, even if it's still rough, you know? And then like, hey, you do this good, let's build on that, and we can still work on this part that needs to be worked on. So I think that's really important. I think it's important, someone that you can connect to and have a relationship with, that you're not just a number. I think otherwise it becomes, if you can't say, hey, look, I need some help, I need to talk to you, I need an emotional piece here also. Like, I've gone through times when I'm like, Lydia, what do? I can't do anything right now. Like, it's not coming. And you're like, hey, keep pushing through or whatever. Like, so you need to have that aspect also. I do think it's important to read an editor's work. Like, there are editors who are really good who don't write, and I can respect that. But for me, I wanted a writer. And to be able to read and to be able to say, they're better than me and they can teach, that's a huge plus for me.
Thank you. I was going to say, it's sort of on the flip side of that. As an editor who is also a writer, there's something that we learn through editing somebody else's works as well. And that is, it brings into, because when I'm reading your work and I'm, and I'm thinking, I'm putting myself into this character, I'm saying, how would I approach this situation? What would I do? Which then subsequently makes me think about my own life experiences. And, there are a lot of hot button topics that we do write about: politics, assault, abuse, you know, morally corrupt people, you know, things like, so it really, as an editor, you start thinking about your life choices or situations that have happened in your life. So there's an emotional aspect that readers and editors get from working on someone else's piece, because we're trying to relate to it, or there are aspects that we relate to. So it really makes me stop and think, you know, about the human experience, and being humble in the fact that, you know, there are moments in my life that I'm not proud of. So I can completely relate to this character who has just beaten the crap out of somebody. You know, so how am I going to react to that? Am I going to be riding this adrenaline high, and then all of a sudden I'm going to think to myself, well, you know, I am such a schmuck. So that bring that piece into that little bit of guilt into the writing. So that's kind of how I approach anybody's work is, you know, how would I relate to this? And that then makes me relate to the writer. There's a reason that they wrote this. The way they did, either personal experience, or out of the necessity of the story. But either way, the fact that you can write that experience means that you have some relation to it as well. So, yeah.
And if I can add just the another thing that I would expect from an editor is absolute honesty. I do not like to work with an editor who's going to say, "Oh, your work is great," while it's absolutely not. So that honesty is 100% important.
Yeah, I've had that experience of you know, doing editing and stuff like that, and then having, you know, somebody take a look at my piece, an entire manuscript, and only having, you know, 3 or 4 comments, and I'm sorry, but I'm not a perfect writer. There's not, you know, there's always something that can be improved on and worked on. So that does not give me it doesn't do anybody any good. It doesn't make me a better writer, and it doesn't, you know, yeah. But that kind of goes along the lines of, you know, thinking about someone who doesn't have a lot to say, the story is really good, or yet, you know, maybe it's not their story. So that makes me think of, you know, how do you cope with creative differences when an editor suggests a revision, but that isn't the vision that you have for the story? That's not your story. So how do you deal with that kind of difference of opinion?
So I think what I would do with that is ask myself why. I think first of all, I would just evaluate what the coach says, and I would also be questioning: did I set up the journey right to make sure that the reader has got the vision I want? And then down the road, if I think I've done all that, or I've talked to the coach about how could I set this up better so that you would get the vision that I want. If I've done all that work and that coach still is not with me, I think I'd have to make a choice whether I would want to continue working on that project with that coach or not. It might mean that I actually, or it might mean that I'm going to be willing to be pushed. Like I said earlier, there's a time when you might choose to go with the coach simply because you're taking it as you trust the coach. Like Lydia has recently challenged me to start writing different characters. I tend to write male characters, and you know, with a certain specific type of thing, and she's like, go write something different. You know, female character, teen girl at 13, or bisexual character of this, or whatever. And you know, I might take that on, right? And so it's also trusting the coach that maybe I actually do need to do this, and trust that. And if I don't like it, I can always go rewrite the project again, right? I can or take the parts I do like and then find a new way of adapting it. I think it's like I said, I can have my own vision, the coach can have her vision, or there could be a third vision we come up together. So I think I would just try to figure out that way, and knowing myself and knowing my relationship, if I have one like we have with Lydia, like I have with Lydia, I think I would probably do what you asked me to do. And then if it wasn't working, I would come back to you.
Yeah.
If I didn't have a relationship, I may not do that.
Yeah, that's sort of always the intention that I have coming into a project is, you know, I'm going to make this suggestion, based on my, academic experience and professional work, and the work that I have done so far, to get to this point of being an editor. But at the end of the day, it's still your story. So you can take it or leave it. I'm suggesting it based on, what I know about the publishing market, what I know about the trends in the market, what's, sort of in terms of style. And at the same time, I also understand this piece that I'm saying, you might need to change could be integral to you for whatever reason. And there's always a discussion to be had. And I think that is, essential to doing my job well as an editor, of being able to say, we need to talk about this. If you want to keep it, that's great. But, what if you did X, Y, Z or to boost it? So that brings me to sort of the next question of, being comfortable in editing and working, with these different suggestions, and being able to come back to an editor and say, hey, this doesn't work for me or something like that. But let's talk about maybe sort of physical space. Like, what sort of an environment are you, what's the best environment for you to be working in on revisions, whether it's physical space or mentally, what's best for you, to be as receptive as possible to editing revisions?
Not being stressed out.
That helps.
Having 2 jobs and 3 kids, my children knocking on my door every 5 minutes. I think for me, it's finding, and I mean, I kind of making a joke of that, but it's actually what I really mean, which is I need not to be so tired that I could actually think. And I am interrupted quite a bit because I have a 4-year-old child, I have a 7-year-old, I have a 10-year-old, and I have a wife who can't be left alone. It's not her responsibility all the time to be with my children. She has her own life. And so, how do I balance that? Because by the time the kids go to bed and I've done everything I need to do for the house, it's, 9:30. And
yeah.
So how do I get into that space? I don't have really a great answer. My best answer is I try to deal with time, meaning I'll say, look, I got 10 minutes. Can I do 3 revisions? And hey, today I'm a little bit more energy. Can I do 4 revisions? And I have a scene that I sent to Lydia about 2 weeks ago. Or no, excuse me. She edited, but I have a new scene I'm about to send. My last one I sent was 2 weeks ago. But I haven't been able to work on it for like the last week and a half because school just started. And as a principal, I'm working sometimes till 11, 12 o'clock at night. So can I take it? I don't think it's a matter of physical space for me. I've learned not to do that. And I've gotten past, I need an hour, right? That's gone. I think as time gets more hectic, can I carve 5 minutes? Can I carve 7 minutes? Can I do 10 minutes? And doing these little, Pomodoro sprints, that's what works. It's just trying to get that energy level up and that mindset.
I love how different my relationship with you is compared to Sandy, and the fact that you can do that is great. And I remember a couple of months ago, Sandy and I looked at one of her manuscripts for a submission for either a query or an agent or something like that, and we edited it in 2 days.
Oh yeah, oh man, I still have the bags under my eyes from that.
I know. I'm still like, all right, I need to do the anti-wrinkle cream, maybe get rid of some gray.
So, just a little context here. I sent a query letter, and all of a sudden I got this full request, and I was like, what? And so, you don't want to wait too long, but you also don't want to send it like the second after you read that email. And we knew we were about halfway through the developmental edits, so we still needed to push on to get all the grammar things and all the typos out of it. And we just hammered, man. We were hammering for 48 hours, but it was done. And I think I didn't write for like 2 or 3 weeks after because I was just done with it. I couldn't anymore. And when it comes to mind space, my mind space was broken. It's just I needed new mind space. But aside from that, we have a pretty regular schedule on when we write. We have like the write-ins, and we used to do that like 3 times a week. And I think at this point we are a bit off that schedule. I mean, I think we are happy right now if we make it once a week or twice a week, but that's also, you know, because of the podcast, because, you know, we are recording the podcast during like a writing session officially. So, you know, like our schedules have changed, and, you know, life happens as well. And I think you just explained that beautifully, Daniel. Like, you have a wife, you have 3 kids. I have one husband, and that's it. So I have a lot more time, and I have the sort of luxury in there, you know, perhaps even. So I think the essence of getting into the right space is to work with the time that you have, albeit a day, or be it 5 minutes. Just find a way to make that time work for you.
Yeah. Go ahead.
I think that you got to find whatever you can. You know, I know another person who on the subway, writes on the subway. You know, I don't take a lunch because as a principal, I don't really get that luxury. But if you've got 10 minutes on the, you know, to have lunch, so it's just making that time.
Yeah, I think coming at this from an editor's perspective, and I have a very different approach with both of you. Like, you know, Daniel, like you said, you'll send me something, and then over the course of a few days, I'll take a look at it and come back to you with edits. And Sandy, you know, we might do a huge crash course 48-hour session, and it being flexible of what you need and when you need it. You know, I have a 10-year-old and an 86-year-old Graham and a dog, and, you know, and all of that stuff. But being able to say, you know what, I know how you both work as writers, and, you know, what is it, how can I best serve within the time period that you need it. And it just so happened that I didn't have any major projects going on at the time, so I was able to say, all right, Sandy, let's do this. I get through it. But you know, it's being an editor, you need to be flexible, and you need to understand, be able to prioritize your schedule and your calendar to say, you know what, I can really devote this time to this piece for a client. So that is really important. What advice would you give to someone who says they don't need an editor, who will solely self-edit? You know, I think I self-edit, but I don't solely self-edit. I have my reasons for needing editors. So I'm curious, there are people who solely self-edit. So what advice would you give to people who say they don't need an editor?
You need an editor. I mean,
yes, that's exactly what I was going to say.
You know, I mean, even at the highest level of the, you know, whether it's if you're a genre writer like Stephen King has an editor, you know, I don't know anyone I've ever heard who does not have some type of editor. Now, you know, at what level of editor do you need? I think that could become a different question. Does everyone need a writing coach versus someone who needs to look at one book? That's a different story, you know. But I think that everyone at some level needs a second pair of eyes to look at their manuscript and just be like, hey, does it make sense? And then, you know, whether obviously you need, you know, grammatical edits and things like that, which is a different type of editor, but just does this make sense is such a great feedback. So I would tell everybody, get an editor.
Yeah, I 100% agree. There's nothing to add here. Just you need an editor, done. Period.
So what would you say, you know, now that everybody knows they need an editor, what is your biggest pet peeve about editing, and how can you sort of get over the slump of editing woes? Nobody likes to open a document and see, you know, 500 comments running down, but we've all been there. So how do you sort of get past that and say, oh, I need to do this. I need to take a look at these comments and revise and stuff like that. What's your process?
So it's funny, I love getting revision comments. In fact, I copy all your revision comments and I keep a separate document from them. and then what I do is I try to build skill sets. I'm like, I look for patterns of what skills am I missing, and then I go try to learn those skills. So for me, I look at it as an opportunity to learn. What I find difficult is I don't know how to solve the problem. Mm-hmm. Right? In other words, the reason why you've given me those revision edits, because I'm not all the time, but a lot of times it's because I'm missing a skill set that you're asking me to work on. So then it's like, how do I work on this skill set? And maybe it's only for a sentence or two. But let's say you're asking me to build a deeper reaction on a character, and I don't know that answer. What do I do? And it's funny, as an artist, you go into yourself so much. You're like, well, this would be my reaction, but I don't, as a human being, I don't know if I'm limited or not limited, but I don't know if I have that full, or at least if I'm conscious of that full range of emotion that I should write in, right? Because when we're writing, we're writing sometimes about emotions that we might have as humans, but we're not aware that we're going through those emotions, or we're not aware of how to at least put those in words. Mm-hmm. So sometimes that is a struggle for me, to articulate those type of reactions, or whatever skill set it is you want to work on. If I'm trying to put a better spin on setting, what is it, that I need to work on? How do I rewrite it if I don't know how? So I think that's where my frustration comes in.
Sorry, my dog decided to go off.
But so I think that's where my revision frustration comes in. Not your comments, but what do I do with them? How do I fix it?
That's fair. Sandy, how about you?
For me, it's the part where I need to remind myself that your comments are not saying that my work is terrible, even though sometimes it just literally says that. Sandy, this is terrible, and I'm like, oh, okay. But
we should clarify for viewers that does not reflect that. She's just a very good friend, so I can't be that blunt with her.
No, short disclaimer here. No, but I got better at this. But in the beginning, I would send you like 3 chapters, and you would send them back with comments, and I would read the comments, and I would be mad. I would, and the funny thing is, I don't think I was even mad at you, but I think I was mad at me, because I would blame myself for writing this shit, because that's basically what it was. It was terrible. It was horrible. It was just bad writing in some ways, and I'm saying this, and it's not even true, but that's how you feel. Mm-hmm. It's like you get mad at yourself for writing something like this. And at the beginning, I would immediately write comments back to you, but before I would hit that send button, I would stop myself and go, nope, don't do that. Take that distance, take the breather. Read all the comments now, give it a day, and then look at it again. And I know it was just something that I could trust would happen. Like the next day I would read it and go, okay, she's right. And then the first half hour I would be embarrassed to say, okay, she's right. And then I'd be like, okay, let's do this. So that is just the process for me. Or at least it was at the very beginning. It was this dramatic. But at this point it isn't, this bad anymore. But I always have to remind myself that breathe, give it time, think about it, and then come back to it. That for me, that's essential.
I think as a writer, I sort of had the same approach. Read all the comments, give it a day, and come back to it. Now I read all the comments and I'm like, I have to take a half an hour and rewrite that whole It's not personal anymore, but like I did the same thing with Daniel's comments. He was kind enough to read sort of the first 3 chapters of Luck of the Irish, which is a manuscript I'm working on, and it was I don't want to look like an idiot in front of my client, but then I'm like, no, he's got some really great points, because I didn't even think of that. So we're always improving, even if we are the editor who's a writer, there's always something that we can learn from that. So awesome. So that sort of brings us towards the end of our questions for you, Daniel. I guess, do you have anything you'd like to promote, or anything further you'd like to say to viewers?
Not really. I have a Facebook page, which is not very active right now. It's Daniel Rafe. And I think what's important is to know where you are in the process of the journey. I know where I am. I'm not ready to quite self-publish yet. I think I'm getting to the point. I am building strategies. I know that I have to still build my audience, and I think we just go forward from there. But I've really enjoyed my time here. Thank you.
Great, thanks so much. We enjoyed having you on.
Well, that's it for today. Thank you for joining us. We had an amazing conversation with Daniel Rafe when we were talking about author success through the use of an editor. And we did not do a Twitter poll this week because we were so focused on the interview. So be sure to check in over the next few days and we will be posting that new Twitter poll. Next episode, we're going to be discussing the Writer's Toolbox. So make sure that you subscribe to our YouTube channel, and also you can check us out at redinkwriters.com. So remember, you've got this even if you don't know what the fuck you're doing.